Alright, going in to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs of all films. Here we go. This is how we do it, you see. This is how we do it. Oh, can I see the Snow White film premiering just now, please?
Oh, yeah. So it's on the screen 8, the small screen.
Yeah.
So the red seats are quite close if you wanted to sit further.
Anywhere is fine.
Yeah, so D7 okay for you?
D7 will work fine by me, thanks, yeah.
$6.99 altogether.
Okay.
That one will top up the box and then one
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. Got it.
Enjoy. M8, M9.
Hello? So it's one of you for Snow White, it's screen 8 for Snow White.
Thank you. Ah, the same screen I went to see Susan made. What the earth was that? Popcorn. That's a lot of popcorn. It's like a bath of popcorn. A shower of popcorn. Alright, let's do this.
You can bust moves in any direction. If you fall, just spin and get right.
So, I just got out from seeing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in View Cinema. I never thought that View Cinema would actually do it, but considering the fact that there's going to be a Snow White remake set to come out this next year, I thought I'd go to see it and just ask myself the question, does Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs still hold up? I mean, I knew it would, but I just thought I'd check for myself just to be authentic. And you know what? Even after about a century or so of Disney's reputation, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs still holds up to this day. Now, the thing about critiquing a movie like this is that it's kind of a trendsetter kind of movie. So critiquing this film is not gonna be the same as critiquing a lot of the stories we have nowadays, where we have increased standards of character building and writing and other things like that, like say in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, another fairy tale film which was excellently well written. With a story like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it's a trendsetter, so our standards of critiquing is kind of different. It's because critiquing a film like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs would be like critiquing like the first Greek plays. Like, it would be kind of unfair to apply our modern standards of critiquing to what was setting off the trends to begin with, because the stories that set off particular trends and set up like the 3-act structure like in the Arthurian legends, or set up the tragedies like with the ancient Greeks, or in this case set up the family virtues and good versus evil established in the fairy tales. Like it's kind of an educational experience to observe, okay, here's the bare basics for this kind of story, and here's the structure of how it goes. So seeing how it's Disney making the first ever feature-length animated film and basing it on a classic Grimm's fairy tale, it makes sense that they would make it very basic. And it works as a family film that can appeal to as far as like toddlers all the way to adults for that very reason. And it's no wonder that it was so appealing during the war times. So do I even need to have a plot synopsis for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? Like, you all know how it goes, but you know what, for the sake of being polite, I guess I guess I'll talk about it. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a classic Grimm's fairy tale story about set in Germany, about medieval times, I would presume. in this in medieval Germany, there is a royal family, but nothing too political or nothing too complex. Just there's this queen, but she's bad because she's this narcissist who thinks she's the fairest of them all, but in reality that's actually Snow White, who's the sweetest woman ever, and I'll get into that later. So the queen decides, as explained in like the opening of the classic storybook, the queen in her jealousy makes Snow White a scullery maid in rags in an attempt to make her less beautiful. But the queen, delving into her black magic, confronts her mirror, mirror on the wall to ask, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror speaks back that, sorry lady, you can dress yourself in royal robes all you like, it's still Snow White. So Snow White's minding her own business. She meets the man of her dreams, and then the queen, out of her jealousy, hires a huntsman to kill Snow White and gut her heart out to put it in a box. Talk about grim. So Snow White's out minding her own business, picking flowers, and the huntsman is about to kill her off, but Snow White is just such a pretty, innocent, pure little thing that the huntsman just can't bring it in himself to kill off Snow White. So he tells her to run away, and she does. She goes into the woods, in fear, hiding from the queen's tyranny. She befriends the animals, and she finds refuge in the dwarf's cottage. She thinks it's a pigsty of a place, so she decides to clean it up. The dwarves themselves are working, mining and tinkering away with their fair business of the diamonds. It won't be long until they reach the heart of the mountain now. Who knows, if they keep it up, they might work with Thor and Oakenshield if they're fortunate enough. So they march on home, only to find, oh, hey, what's this? Our house is being occupied. It's not only been occupied, it's been cleaned up. So they go inside, and they find out that Snow White is inside. And so, long story short, they agree to help her out, hide her from the queen. And so Snow White and the dwarves have a jolly good time together, dancing about, singing songs, telling stories, all that good shebang. All's good and well until the queen asks the magic mirror, who's the fairest of them all? And the magic mirror's like, sorry lady, look, Snow White's still alive? She's hiding out in this dwarf's cottage. Oh yeah? Queen asks, so how do you explain this convincing looking human heart? Magic Mirror's like, oh, well, I mean, I don't necessarily blame you for, like, mistaking, like, a pig's heart for, like, human organs. I mean, and you could, like, donate pig's organs for, like, human organs and stuff. I don't know, are you willing to give some of your human organs? Queen's like, no! I'm gonna poison that female dog. I almost said. So, evil queen, upset at being tricked by the huntsman, takes matters into her own hands, uses black magic to transform herself in the disguise of a hag, and then poisons an apple and makes her way to trick Snow White into eating the apple. The dwarves go out on their work, and even though the dwarves warn sweet Snow White of the stranger danger, she still does not heed the stranger danger advice, because the queen is just that cunning. So the queen offers the Snow White. Offers the Snow White. Offer the Snow White. The Snow White.
Offers the Snow White female person.
Okay. That's a nice garden, by the way. Offers the Snow White person the apple, and she tricks her into eating it. She eats it, and she goes into what's called the Sleeping Death. So then the evil queen declares, "Ha ha! Now I shall be the fairest of them all." That's pretty much what Ezra Miller will think if he ever replaces Gal Gadot. The evil queen leaves the scene, but the dwarves have been informed by the animals that Snow White's in danger, so she notices that she's been caught in the act, so she makes a run for it. The dwarves give chase, and the evil queen notices that she's caught herself in quite the pickle, so she has one last dirty trick up her sleeve: squash the dwarves to death with a big boulder. But that completely backfires when, I guess, God himself, through thunder and lightning, sends the evil queen pummeling to her doom. And the vultures have a nice lunch. Nom, 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 nom. Or supper, depending on the time of day. And poor Snow White is dead. The dwarves are upset. But fortunately, Prince Charming comes along to break the curse of the Sleeping Death through true love's kiss. And Snow White is brought back to life, and everyone's happy, and Snow White goes to the castle with Prince Charming. They'll live happily ever after. The end. Basic storytelling, fairy tale, very basic stuff, classic. That's the formula that Walt Disney and his company had to work off with. Now, of course, looking at a story like that, it's very basic stuff. But as I mentioned before, and this is a common phrase depending on what aspects of Disney you look at, this is the one that started it all. This is the one that set off the trend. So it's established the trend, not only paying homage to the fairy tales that they were adapting, but also setting up the formula for what they were going to bring about in years to come, which would become frequent storytelling tropes in their in their films. So they take a fairy tale, they lighten it up a bit for the family, and they put in a few original songs in there. They have gorgeous animation, which still holds up. They work their hardest to make it presentable. They add in some humorous charm to any potential side characters. There will be a fair maiden princess and there'll be family virtues, and there'll be true love's kiss that will revive a person back to life. I guess there's a few other tropes we could talk about. The troubled parent relationships, which seems to be a frequent trend in Disney movies for some reason. The whole Prince Charming, the friends with nature, etc., etc., etc. Why is it that this particular version of why this particular telling of Snow White holds up so well? I think it's mainly because it is so accessible. That's part of the charm of the Disney films. Whenever Disney, from the 1920s all the way up to probably the 2000s, arguably the 2010s, whenever they reinvented the fairy tale, whenever you thought of a certain fairy tale, the first thing that would come to mind would be the version adapted by Disney. That's the wonderful appeal of accessibility that Disney was aiming for back at the day. And another reason why this version still holds up is just its sheer innovation. This isn't just a family film. This is this is one of those films that revolutionized filmmaking as we know it. Just as the first shot of a train was like the first ever black and white piece of filmmaking, and people thought they'd get run over. Or just as how people were blown away by the practical effects of Star Wars, so too were people blown away by how far animation could go with Snow White. Up until then, Walt Disney and his company were only working on what was called like, was it called the Silly Symphonies? Or no, Merry Medleys was, that was the Looney Tunes thing, right? Anyway, Walt Disney was there when animation was beginning to become more mainstream as a little entertainment thing, and animation was very, very basic back in the day. You'd have these cutesy cartoon characters would be dancing and singing about, like, short films by Disney at the time would literally be like, this character is minding their own business in this certain setting, and then initiates some kind of song and dance number, and then the short film ends, or something like that, or a little bit of slapstick, something like that. They would get more and more ambitious, but eventually this would be their most ambitious project yet. It was tricky enough to learn how to do traditional animation from the ground up. They had to learn that, okay, well, animation is about like making individual artworks, and then sound, like sound technology was quite new at the time, so sound technology was simply electric signals being like technically written down in a way in some kind of equipment so that they could repeat the frequency in such a way, and they would have to have a visual electric frequency for the way the cameras worked, and they'd have to figure out the mechanics and rules of 2D animation, such as animating every single bit of the backdrop is going to be a pain in the arse for us. Why not just have these still painted backdrops and then have individual frames for these characters? So that's what they had to work off with. It wasn't until around Snow White that they were coming up with other revolutionary techniques like rotoscoping, where they would film record someone in a costume acting out the part of a character, and then as they animated they would draw over the film itself, or use that as a frame of reference, either way, and frame by frame really capture the movements of these different characters interacting with one another. Yeah, that's the standard. I mean, I suppose you could appreciate Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs more as a technical achievement, because this is a feature-length film in full color, and Walt Disney had to like sell off his garage and other things just so they could get the budget to complete this film, which at its core is a fairly basic retelling of a classic fairy tale. But again, I think this formula works because the story they have to work off with is so basic and so timeless. But I mean, even if they had something to keep in mind, even if they had the technical achievements, they still had to make the story work. Unfortunately, it still works because the story has these timeless elements. It has it's got humor, which is really charming and light-hearted, and there's even a bit of humor for older people, namely with Grumpy the dwarf, and a few other things, like with a few relatable aspects, like with Doc's mispronunciations, there's the fact that the animation does still look quite gorgeous. Other aspects of the work, the family virtues and family values that still appeal to this day. So in this modern day and age, even modern Disney themselves would be rather critical of the role of a woman back in the 1930s, and by extension back in the way they depicted the fairy tales. You see, over time, there were a few tropes that were made fun of, such as, like, I mean, I can understand critiquing love at first sight, which even Frozen made fun of. Like, that I can understand. But recently, they've been very self-critical to the point where they're completely neglecting the family virtues that made them so appealing to begin with. So for this reason, a lot of people like to accuse Snow White as being, oh, she's not independent, oh, she's not being her own person, she's not being individualistic. But they're severely overlooking some actual virtues that Snow White represents in the film. She's not just some woman who's some passive player. She's an active participant in the story. And I say she's an active participant because there has to be a reason as to why Snow White is worthy to be protected from the Queen. And it's not just because she's pretty. It's not just because she sings well. Throughout the film, it's very clear that she's a very kind and sweet individual. Like, honestly, if she were any sweeter, she'd practically be a strawberry lollipop. That's how sweet she is. I think she's very likable. I mean, the way she has that nice, softly high-pitched voice, her a very sweet nature when it comes to interacting with people, even with the person that's trying to kill her, as I've noticed. With several people that are trying to kill her, as I've noticed, actually, come to think of it. You just think, like if Snow White was some kind of narcissistic, self-obsessed jerk, then that would give more people, arguably would give more people some reason to axe her off. But I look at scenes like the Huntsman scene, and we see Snow White oblivious of the fact that she's about to be assassinated, or attempted rather. She sees a baby bird. She says, "Oh, are you lost? I'm sure your parents are around somewhere. Oh, there they are. Go, fly up to them." And she's doing this whilst the huntsman is about to stab her. And I think this was a contributing factor to the huntsman changing his mind, because Snow White, oblivious to what's about to happen, is showcasing kindness. And that kind of kindness is just too pure to assassinate. And there's something interesting to be said about true beauty lying from within. I mean, it is true that you have stories like Beauty and the Beast, and with DreamWorks' recent film Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, which points out the fact that beauty isn't always external, it's also internal. But I've heard this argument lately that from a lot of people's personal experience, people's beauty will often reflect in their outward actions as well, and by extension their outward appearance, arguably. So for example, one could make the argument that Snow White is sweet, and because she's sweet internally, it then reflects on her external appearance. So I am not saying her external appearance validates her internal worth. No, this is the other way around, and that's why Snow White is such an admirable figure. Her internal worth reflects her external worth, and that's why she's called the fairest of the land. I've heard people say that people who are fairly narcissistic and fairly bad, like their bad behavior can often reflect in their outward appearance. I suppose, thinking about it, even if you were to make yourself look pretty in society's eyes, there's still going to be a few contributing factors that play into who you really are inside. Like, even if, like, the evil queen, for example, were like the most gorgeous diva in the land, she still has this sour expression. She still has that spiteful look of jealousy. She still is full of malice, and these cruel, corrupt characteristics can reflect and sour what is otherwise an externally beautiful appearance. So there's a lot. I guess the whole lesson of true beauty from within is a lot more nuanced and complicated than a lot of people let on. So I guess that's quite interesting to talk about. But why else is Snow White worthy to be protected? She's very sweet towards the animals around her, but she also shows she is a woman of responsibility. Now, I find it kind of strange that the hyper woke crowd will call out for women to be independent, strong, and I get what they're trying to say, but something they're overlooking is that they've got to take responsibility in order to validate that independence. So, I mean, yeah, being strong's great, but if you can't harness that strength into responsibility, then what's it all worth? And I suppose that can reflect on the behavior of the dwarves, and boy oh boy does it reflect my personal life in the past as well. Just so like in the dwarves case, despite their success in their mining business, they are utter slobs, because I can relate to this. They've gotten into the habit of mining for so long, I presume they've completely neglected and overlooked some of the more domestic and housely duties. Now, the dwarves could have easily done it themselves, but it seems that they're lacking in certain virtues and characters. So when Snow White enters their lives, Snow White rightly calls them out for it and tells them, you're not going to get supper until you wash your hands, or you should tidy up everything in your place. So yes, Snow White is independent in the sense of she is a responsible person. So she does take action, and come to think of it, she would make for a great queen if that's the way she treats things. And she's had to put up with being a culinary maid, so she would know about being tidy. See, that's a genuine virtue that a lot of people are overlooking these days, because they associate domestic work with oppression. But doing domestic work can actually be very liberating. Seriously, people who say like domestic work is oppression, they're exactly the kinds of people who would be avoiding responsibility and practically have no better tolerance levels than like a 3-year-old toddler whining to their mother for not getting a packet of Skittles. That's a good humor, eh? So yes, I would say Snow White is an admirable Disney princess, contrary to what a lot of people would say about her. Not to mention, Snow White and the dwarves know when to have some fun. They like to play music, they like to dance, and these dwarves, they're just so charming, they're so likable. What charming? Yeah, I mean, so as I said before, critiquing this film in the way we would nowadays probably wouldn't be all that fair, and because one could say, oh, this kind of drags the plot a bit, but because the story is so basic, I'd say that the plot is more fixated on establishing characters more so than progressing the plot. So I guess that's why you have these extended shenanigans, because it establishes these different dwarves' personalities, as well as how they work off each other, and which establishes later on why they depend so much on Snow White. The dwarves are showcased as kind of a chaotic bunch by themselves, but with an authoritative female figure who can help with their domestic work in a constructive way, as well as bring them love and nurture in their lives, their lives establish more order. So it's really interesting what I've been learning about masculinity and femininity, and how femininity is better able to harness the strength of nurture by their very design compared to men. This is a problem that modern society tends to have. It's not that there can't be any feminine men or masculine women. It's just the fact that by their very design, whilst there can be variations, women were primarily made for nurture. And I think there was this Hebrew word used to describe women as rescuers. And there's a Hebrew term for men that means protectors. So the males and females each have their different strengths, but our modern society is making the mistake that, because women have been oppressive in the past, means we must neglect all these domestic things associated with women. But it doesn't work like that. You can't go from one extreme to the other. You've got to have a balance. And people often make this mistake that, we should probably have some kind of matriarchy to make up for the constant patriarchy of the past. But a lot of people overlook that men have been used and abused as well. Young boys have been abused for slave work. Men have been sacrificed at war. So wouldn't it make sense that we would need both men and women to take the lead in life? Because men and women each have their strengths. And sadly, modern society, in the name of being inclusive, are trying to neglect these virtues. But these virtues that's represented in Snow White actually mean quite a lot. We see these virtues at play, and it makes Snow White all the more likable and all the more virtuous. She's a woman who does take responsibility. Honestly, from the way I'm talking, it sounds as if most of the woke people these days don't know how to clean their rooms. But then again, I can be quite untidy too. Oh man. But anyway, yeah, that was funny. What else is there to say about this kind of film? I suppose because it is a basic formula, but I guess it works because they appeal to these timeless virtues, because there's a reason why stories like this are timeless, because they appeal to virtues that are timeless. And I find that the best kind of storytellers are not necessarily the ones that escape reality, but the ones that confront reality to improve ourselves. Now, of course, a fiction isn't historically true, but there's profound truths in it. Fiction has this fascinating ability, and there are many people who have taken advantage of fiction in the past. Fiction has this ability to carry these abstract ideas and present them in imaginative ways far better than if we were talking in purely literal terms. And it makes it more memorable for a broad demographic to remember for generations to come. And that's why stories like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is just so timeless, because it establishes the need for love, the need for a family, the need for homeliness, the vanity of self-obsession, which the woke crowd could learn a lot from. All this stuff. So it's interesting talking about like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from a psychological perspective as well, having grown all this knowledge. Which I suppose, what else is there to say about the film? The songs are quite catchy, and there's a lot of things that are sure to put a sweet smile on your face. Even grumpy smiles. I mean, come on. If a film like that can make grumpy smile, it should make you smile too. Come on, perk up. I think humor can be good. So with a film like that, so innovative, I suppose this is a good segue to bring up the fact that this particular version of Snow White has certainly come to mind for generations to come. It's had a big impact, and it's amazing how Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is like the best-selling film of all time, and I guess I've kind of paid tribute to it, quite literally, by just seeing it in the cinema, because it is just one of the first films that it did make such a big impact, and it's probably not surprising that it got re-released in cinemas over the years for like anniversaries and stuff like that. So it's undeniable that they released Snow White this year for several reasons. Firstly, it's Disney's 100th anniversary as a company, so it's fascinating to see all the wonder and entertainment that Disney has provided all these decades. But in a way, it's also saddening, because I think the other reason why they've decided to release the film in the cinema for now is to prepare us for the remake, which brings me onto the topic of why the remake is going to suck.